Have you ever witnessed a king being dethroned in his own castle, not by an army with swords and shields, but by the quiet, unyielding force of a single man's conviction? What happens when the master of ridicule, the jester who became a monarch of the media, finally aims his wit at a target that doesn't just absorb the blow, but reflects it with blinding intensity? This is the story of a television interview that was meant to be just another segment in a nightly news satire, another celebrity promotion on the well-trodden path of late-night television. Instead, it became a legendary confrontation, a psychological duel that sent shockwaves through the industry and ultimately led to the silent, unceremonious removal of one of television's most influential programs. It's the story of Jon Stewart, the giant slayer of cable news, and Tom Cruise, the Sphinx of Hollywood. It is the story of the night the laughter died, and a show followed it into the grave. The air in New York City on that crisp October evening in 2023 carried the first real bite of autumn. Yellow cabs streaked down the avenues of Hell's Kitchen like hornets, their headlights cutting through the premature twilight, just a stone's throw from the Hudson River. Inside a state-of-the-art studio that Apple had poured millions into the atmosphere was anything but cold. It was electric, buzzing with the controlled chaos of a high-profile television production. This was the home of The Problem with Jon Stewart, the celebrated return of the man who had for 16 years on The Daily Show been America's trusted, cynical conscience. The audience, a carefully selected crowd of a few hundred, hummed with anticipation. They were here to see the master at work. They were here for the takedown. The witty evisceration, the moment when Stewart, with his signature blend of exasperation and sharp intellect, would dismantle some powerful figure or flawed idea, all for their cathartic amusement. Jon Stewart himself was in his element. Now in his early 60s, his hair more silver than salt and pepper, he exuded a comfortable authority. In the pre-show meetings, he was relaxed, pacing the writer's room with a well-worn Mets cap on his head, sipping from a mug of coffee that seemed surgically attached to his hand. He'd done this thousands of times. The guest for the evening was Tom Cruise, on a promotional tour for the latest installment of the Mission Impossible franchise. For Stewart and his team, this was on paper a fairly standard booking. They'd play the fawning clips of Cruise hanging off a cliff or a plane. They'd banter about the absurdity of a man his age performing such death-defying stunts, and then if the opening was there, Stewart would gently, surgically probe the area everyone was curious about, but few dared to tread with any real tenacity: Scientology. Stewart wasn't a gotcha journalist like the cable news blowhards he so often mocked. He was a comedian, a satirist. His plan was to use humor, a disarming question, here a raised eyebrow there, to poke holes in the carefully constructed facade of the world's biggest movie star. He viewed Cruise as an enigma, certainly, but an enigma he could solve for the entertainment of his audience. He was confident. He was prepared. He was the king in his court, and the guest was there to entertain and perhaps be gently sacrificed for the good of the show. Across town in the penthouse suite of the Mandarin Oriental overlooking Central Park, the preparation was of a different nature entirely. Tom Cruise was not just getting ready for a television appearance, he was preparing for a mission. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, the entirety of Manhattan sprawling beneath him like a glowing circuit board. He was impeccably dressed in a simple dark tailored suit that made him look more like a high-stakes corporate negotiator than an actor. His focus was legendary in Hollywood, an intensity that could unnerve directors and co-stars alike. Tonight, that focus was absolute. He wasn't just there to sell movie tickets. He was acutely aware of Jon Stewart's reputation and style. He knew the game. He knew that the affable banter about stunts and filmmaking would be a mere prelude, a softening of the target before the real questions were deployed. He had seen how Stewart operated, how he used the laughter of the crowd as a weapon, creating an environment where dissent seemed foolish and earnestness appeared absurd. Cruz was not walking into an ambush. He was walking into a pre-scouted arena, fully aware of the traps and the terrain. He held no animosity towards Stewart, but he also held no illusions. He was not coming to be a willing participant in his own gentle mockery. He was coming to speak his truth, and he would do so with a force of will that few people, including Jon Stewart, had ever encountered face to face. As his car sliced through the midtown traffic towards the studio, he wasn't nervous. He was centered. He was ready. The first 15 minutes of the interview unfolded exactly as everyone in the studio expected. The lights were hot, the audience was roaring with laughter, and Jon Stewart was in complete command. He played a breathtaking clip from Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning, showing Cruz riding a motorcycle off a Norwegian cliff thousands of feet high. The audience gasped, then applauded wildly. So Tom Stewart began leaning back in his chair with a familiar, folksy grin. My first question, my only real question is, why? I'm at an age where I consider it a stunt if I get up from the couch without making a noise. You're you. You've done it all. Why are you still trying to kill yourself for our entertainment? The audience laughed. It was the perfect Stewart opener, self-deprecating, complimentary, yet subtly questioning the guest's sanity. Cruz smiled that billion-dollar world-famous smile. Well, Jon, it's because I love what I do. It's for the audience. It's about creating a practical, visceral experience that you just can't get from a green screen. It's about pushing the art form. He was charming, articulate, and giving the audience exactly what they wanted. They bantered back and forth. Stewart cracked jokes about the film's insurance policies. Cruz shared a funny anecdote about a stunt that went slightly wrong. The energy was light, breezy, and utterly conventional. Stewart, feeling the rhythm, saw his opening. He leaned forward, his expression shifting from comedic to thoughtfully curious. That dedication, that belief in what you're doing to the point of risking everything? It's fascinating, Stewart said, his voice lowering slightly. It speaks to a level of commitment, a belief system that goes beyond just making a movie. And that makes me wonder about the other belief systems in your life. The ones people are famously curious about. A quiet ripple went through the audience. This was it, the pivot. Cruz's smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened. The easygoing charm was overlaid with a new layer of intense focus. I'm happy to talk about it, Jon. What do you want to know? Stewart, sensing no resistance, felt emboldened. He decided to go for a direct but humorous jab. Well, let's be honest. Some of the tenets of Scientology, to an outsider, to a layperson like me, they sound, and I say this with respect, a little sci-fi. You're the star of sci-fi movies. Do you ever see the overlap? Does it ever feel like you're just rehearsing for a different kind of film? Some in the audience chuckled nervously. It was a classic Stewart move, framing a sharp critique as a moment of folksy confusion. He waited for a flustered defense, a bit of stammering he could then pick apart. He didn't get one. That's an interesting way you frame that. Jon Cruz replied, his voice perfectly, even and calm. You use words like outsider and layperson, which implies that one must be on the inside to truly understand. Would you say the same thing about the Holy Trinity or the resurrection in Catholicism? Or the tenets of quantum physics? Most people don't understand those either, but they accept that experts or believers do. Why is one belief system fair game for public ridicule, while others are given a respectful distance? The audience's laughter died in their throats. The comeback was so swift, so logical, and so devoid of anger that it completely neutralized Stewart's line of attack. Stewart, momentarily thrown, tried to recover. But Tom, that's different. We're talking about an organization with a lot of controversy, a lot of secrecy. Are we? Cruz interrupted, still without raising his voice, but his intensity ratcheted up a notch. Or are we talking about what the media people in positions like yours choose to focus on? You have a platform that reaches millions. You have a responsibility. Do you use it to genuinely understand something? Or do you use it to confirm a pre-existing narrative for a laugh? Stewart's smile was gone now. He was no longer a comedian gently ribbing a guest. He was a debater who had been unexpectedly challenged on his own terms. The audience was dead silent, their heads turning back and forth, as if watching a tennis match. "I think my record shows that I try to question things to hold power to account," Stewart retorted, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "And I commend that," Cruz said, leaning forward slightly. "But there's a difference between questioning to understand and questioning to belittle. You started this by calling my beliefs sci-fi. It was a joke, a good line, it got a laugh. But it's also dismissive. It's designed to end the conversation, not to start one. It's a tool to make your audience feel smart and superior without having to do the actual work of engaging with a complex idea. It's intellectual laziness, disguised as wit." The air in the studio turned to ice. Tom Cruise had just in calm and measured tones dissected and exposed the core of Jon Stewart's entire comedic method, and he had done it without breaking a sweat. The hunter had just realized the prey he was stalking was in fact a far more dangerous predator. The rising action was over. The confrontation had arrived at its terrifying peak. The silence in the studio was absolute, a vacuum where laughter and applause used to be. The bright, hot lights seemed to press down on Jon Stewart, who for the first time in his long and storied career looked utterly lost. His usual arsenal of witty retorts, sarcastic asides, and incredulous stares was empty. He had built an empire on deconstruction, on being the smartest, most cynical man in the room. But now, sitting across from him was a man who refused to be deconstructed, who was using a scalpel of pure, unadorned conviction to dissect Stewart himself. Feeling the control of his show, his stage, his entire reality slipping through his fingers, Stewart made a fatal error. He abandoned his persona and got personal. He dropped the pretense of the curious satirist and became a condescending critic. "Look, Tom," he said, forcing a dismissive little laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "I get it. You're a pro. You're on message. But let's just be real here for a second, man to man. You're a brilliant guy. You're a cinematic genius. You can't actually believe this stuff. This is an act, right? It has to be. For the cameras, for the brand. Nobody this intelligent could truly buy into all of that." He gestured vaguely, a gesture meant to encompass everything about Cruise's faith, a gesture of complete and utter dismissal. And in that moment, something changed in Tom Cruise. It was not dramatic. There was no shouting, no sudden movement. But it was the most terrifying transformation anyone in that room had ever seen. The charming movie star vanished. The patient debater disappeared. What remained was a concentration of will so pure and so intense it felt like a physical force. His famous laser-like eyes, which a moment before had been engaged and challenging, now became cold, flat, and penetrating. He leaned forward not aggressively, but with the slow, deliberate motion of a tectonic plate shifting. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost a whisper, yet it cut through the studio with more power than a shout ever could. "Let me be real with you, Jon," he began, holding Stewart's gaze with an unblinking intensity. "For 16 years, on your old show and now here, you have built a throne out of irony. You sit on it every night and you pass judgment from the safety of a comedian's license. You trade in the currency of the smirk. You have masterfully created a worldview for your audience where sincere belief of any kind is presented as a character flaw, where passion is suspicious and conviction is a punchline." He paused, letting the words hang in the dead air. Stewart, for his part, was physically incapable of looking away. He was pinned by the actor's gaze. "You don't seek to understand," Cruise continued, his voice still low and chillingly calm. "You seek to dismantle. There's a fundamental difference. Understanding requires empathy, humility, the willingness to accept that your own perspective might not be the only valid one. Dismantling only requires a crowbar and a sense of superiority. You and a generation of media you've inspired have created a culture of spectators who think ridicule is a form of participation. They mock the builder, but they can't lay a single brick. They critique the artist, but they can't paint a single stroke. They tear down the believer, but they don't have the courage to stand for anything themselves. He gestured almost imperceptibly towards the silent audience. You asked me if I actually believe. Let me ask you, do you actually believe in anything? Anything at all? Or has your entire reality been filtered through a lens of such pervasive cynicism that all you can do is poke holes in the beliefs of others? What do you build? Jon, what do you create? Beyond the laughter, beyond the ratings? What do you leave behind? A legacy of clever jokes. A generation that knows how to laugh at everything and believe in nothing. He leaned back, the intensity in his eyes, never wavering. You see, my beliefs, they require me to be an active participant in my life, to be responsible, to create, to help, to strive for something better. Whether you agree with the specifics or not is irrelevant. My convictions demand action. Your cynicism, what does it demand? It demands only that you watch and that you judge. So please don't you ever, from your comfortable chair, question the sincerity of my belief. You are not qualified to do so. It was over. It was a knockout. Not a single person in the audience moved or made a sound. The crew in the control room stood frozen, watching their monitors in stunned disbelief. Jon Stewart sat at his desk, his face pale, his mouth slightly agape. He had no response. There was no witty comeback. There was no sarcastic quip. He had been completely and utterly dismantled live on his own show, using his own supposed values of honesty and realness as the weapon against him. The king had been stripped bare in front of his entire court, not by insults or anger, but by a quiet, devastating tidal wave of genuine conviction. The cameras kept rolling, capturing the endless, excruciating silence of a man who had finally run out of things to say. The moments that followed the climax were a study in surreal, agonizing silence. The floor director, after a long, painful pause, finally signaled for a commercial break through Stewart's earpiece. The show's theme music began to play, jarringly upbeat and completely alien to the funereal atmosphere in the studio. Stewart, looking dazed, mumbled something like, "We'll be right back," his voice hollow. As soon as the lights dimmed for the break, he took off his microphone, placed it on the desk, and walked off stage without a word to the audience or his crew. Tom Cruise, in stark contrast, remained in his chair for a moment, his posture perfect, his expression serene. He then stood up, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the stunned audience, and was escorted off stage by his publicist. There was no handshake. There was no courteous farewell. There was only the deafening silence of a battle that had been decisively and unexpectedly won. When the show returned from commercial, Stewart was back at his desk, but he was a changed man. The spark was gone. He rushed through the final segment, a pre-taped bit that felt clumsy and pointless after the raw reality of what had just transpired. He ended the show with his customary, "Here it is, your moment of zen," but the words were rote, delivered with the energy of a man who had just seen a ghost. The true fallout, however, began the next morning. The interview clip didn't just go viral. It became a cultural supernova. But the narrative was not the one Stewart's team had ever envisioned. The headlines weren't "Stewart grills Cruise on Scientology." They were "Tom Cruise verbally dismantles Jon Stewart. The night Jon Stewart lost his mojo. Cruise questions a generation of cynicism in stunning takedown." On social media, the reaction was a firestorm. People who had long revered Stewart were suddenly looking at him through a new lens. Was his brand of satire just smug bullying? Had he become the very thing he used to mock, a powerful, insulated media figure who was out of touch with genuine conviction? Commentators from across the political spectrum weighed in. Conservatives praised Cruise for defending belief and taking on a liberal media icon. Even many on the left conceded that Cruise had made a powerful point about the corrosive nature of relentless irony. For Apple, The corporate entity behind the show, it was a public relations nightmare. Apple's brand is meticulously curated. It's about optimism, creativity, and clean, aspirational aesthetics. The problem with Jon Stewart was supposed to be a prestige project, a smart, edgy show that still fit within that ethos. But now their star host was the subject of a global conversation about intellectual arrogance and public humiliation. The problem, in the show's title, had become inextricably linked with Stewart himself. Advertisers already wary of controversy grew nervous. Internal discussions at the highest levels of Apple TV Plus reportedly became tense. The show's identity was shattered. It was no longer the place for smart takedowns. It was the place where the host himself was taken down. A few weeks later, the official announcement came. It was couched in the bland corporate language of all such partings. Apple and Jon Stewart had mutually agreed to part ways over creative differences. Insiders knew the truth. The show was effectively canceled. The Cruise interview wasn't the sole reason cited in the press release, but it was the catalyst. It was the moment the brand became toxic. It was the wound from which the show's credibility could never recover. Jon Stewart, the giant of late-night satire, quietly faded from the airwaves, his ambitious return cut short. The ultimate message of that fateful night transcended the specific beliefs of either man. It became a powerful lesson about the nature of modern discourse. It demonstrated that in a world saturated with irony and cynicism, genuine, unshakable conviction, regardless of its content, possesses a raw and formidable power. It was a stark reminder that underestimating an opponent is a catastrophic error, especially when that opponent is operating from a place of deep personal belief. Jon Stewart walked into that interview believing he was the inquisitor, armed with the superior weapon of wit. He discovered too late that he had brought a satirical knife to a spiritual gunfight. The real problem that the interview exposed was a culture that had become so addicted to tearing things down that it had forgotten how to build anything up. So where do we draw the line between healthy skepticism and corrosive cynicism? Was Tom Cruise defending a controversial belief system? Or was he making a much broader, more profound point about the state of our media and our culture? Did Jon Stewart deserve his fate? A victim of his own well-honed tactics? Or was he unfairly targeted for simply doing the job he had been celebrated for decades? This single interview became a mirror reflecting our own complex and often contradictory feelings about faith, media celebrity, and the very nature of truth in the modern age. What do you believe? Was this a case of a powerful celebrity using their force of will to silence a critic? Or was it a long overdue reckoning for a brand of comedy that had perhaps gone too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This is a conversation that goes to the heart of how we communicate with each other, and it's a conversation worth having. If you found this deep dive into a pivotal cultural moment compelling, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing this video with someone who appreciates a good story, and of course subscribing to the channel for more content that goes beyond the headlines. The most valuable lesson from that night in New York is a simple but powerful one. You cannot build a kingdom on ridicule alone. Sooner or later, someone with unshakable conviction will walk through your door, and when they do, you had better be sure you have something more to stand on than just a good punchline. They might not be laughing with you,